there's not a huge audience, and I think that when they're more casual, they're a bit more fun. So we're going to sort of talk through the history of the internet, where we are in Thailand, and what can we expect for the near future. So I'll start by sort of doing an introduction, got a presentation, but again, keeping it casual, please just interrupt, ask questions, try and keep it more as a conversation. And then I'll also be dropping questions to Andrew next to me and Django on the far left. And we've got a few sort of panel questions towards the end. It is Halloween, so there's a couple of silly icons in there, so that's why they're there. So going to do some introductions. Going with the Halloween theme, we do have the Witches of Eastwick here. So I'll start with Andrew.
Thank you so much. Yeah, obviously we take this stuff very seriously. So basically, I know a few of you, I've been here for quite some time. But I work with Hitachi focusing on some of the social innovation and smart services we're putting into new urban development, and we'll talk about that a little bit. And as a company, we focus a lot on research into what can be practically done with IoT and the internet. So we'll talk about real examples from Thailand. I know, my wife thinks I'm looking much better today.
So clearly Gareth wrote this and chose that lovely picture. So I've got a background in technology over a very long period. So I started as a developer and started doing, like many people, making websites for friends, and then doing it professionally, and then working for bigger and bigger organizations, moving into architecture and team leading, and I've been using one of the technologies I've used for a long time is something called Drupal, which nobody's heard of, so I will not bore you, other than to say it's an open source enterprise content management system. I then moved on from there to a company called Capgemini in the UK, where I was recruited by a digital startup to run a practice there. Since then, I've set up my own sort of boutique consulting firm. So it's a digital consulting firm. We've got a technical bias in London, and also have some interesting related business in Bangkok. So I've been sort of between London and Bangkok for the last couple of years.
And then me, I've been on the board at the Chamber since January. I run a software company here. I think I've met most of you at either one of these events or various Chamber events. And recently I've been working on a sort of market analysis and reservation engine for restaurants. So I guess one of the things to sort of set the scene is talking about where it all started. You've all used the internet for a while. I think Django's used it for the longest. And I kind of wanted to talk through that, go through a couple of old screenshots, remind you all of what it used to look like and where we've come. Talk through various iterations of the web, and then go to the mobile revolution. Also going forward, we'll talk about what's potentially coming, which is Andrew's main field. He's sort of the future expert here, and yeah, we'll just kind of talk through it. So, network computers, or the internet as we know it, has been around an awfully long time. Since the 1960s. I think the first idea was actually imagined and written on a memo in 1960, and years that followed that, there were lots of various technology types that came out. Everyone had their own version of the internet, and this is like every part of technology. You had the explosion of options, and then they all kind of get whittled out, and you end up with the one you're going to use, and that's what we have today. So the first idea of kind of the internet, of how we have it, and the first working mechanism was actually a British invention in 1967. And then the Americans kind of made it a bit better in a couple of years later. So, 40 years ago, we had what is the core of the internet now, which was ARPANET. And Django, you said that the Russians had their own version.
It's Russian FidoNet, I think that's the
FidoNet. And back then we had 213 computers connected to this network. I don't know how many we have now, but we have a lot more than that. And then a couple of years later, the computer scientists behind this changed to actually what we're still using today, and that is the TCP/IP protocol, which you might be able to explain what it is.
Don't look at me, I'm not going to do it. You can do version 6, go for it.
I don't think we need to.
It's a language and it works.
Yeah.
It's a protocol. Enough.
Cool. And as with all technology, there was the first ever live demo. So this was ARPANET, and it was between two universities. So on their computer, they typed the letter L, and on the phone they said, "Do you see the L?" And yes, we see the L. And they said, "We typed the O. Do you see the O?" Yep, we see the O. And then they typed the G, and it all crashed. And I guess every live demo I've ever done has ended this way, and that's just, I don't know why, but it's just how it happens. So we had, like I said, many different networks. There was DARPA, ARPANET, the UK one, which I've forgotten what it's called, and Robert Kahn, him and Tim Lee Burns put it together to settle on the one network that we have. And that technology that was around in the 60s is really what brings us Netflix, Facebook, the internet we use today. And of course, the things I'm not supposed to mention that's on the internet. So we use the www. We all type in the World Wide Web .something.com, which I think Google has actually just dropped from Chrome. It's not necessary anymore. And for this, we must thank a Brit, which is always good to say. So in 1989, which was a good year, that's the year I was born, the www was released along with, this is where they can give the history lesson here. We had the first web browser. And then we had, if you remember, things like Netscape Navigator, Internet Explorer, and other earlier versions. And the rest is history. Now, this video might play, and hopefully we'll get sound. I don't know if you will presumably remember this before you joined the internet, and having to ask to use the phone line. And so this was always quite fun as a kid.
2 out of 5.
Sorry?
2 out of 5 serial ways.
Okay. Oh yeah, Bob used to work for BT, so that's kind of his area. And I remember having to sort of ask my mum, is it okay to use the internet? Which is thankfully something we don't have to do anymore. So I guess since we had dial-up, what's really changed? What stages have we gone through? So I'm going to go through some of the stages now, and at the end I've got a kind of a map of where it all went, and I'd like you to sort of say this is where I think we are today, and then I'll reveal the years. So if anyone used to buy software, you used to get it in a big box like this. So you used to have an enormous box with a CD and then a piece of paper explaining how to use it.
They came on discs.
Discs or floppies. I think I remember them. And at the beginning, the internet wasn't how we use it today. It was a bunch of people like Andrew and Django here that used it in their bedrooms. And
that's one interpretation.
And
Mine was in the living room, thank you.
living room, okay. And if you wanted, if you worked in a company and you wanted the internet, you had to ask your IT department. And thankfully we don't have to do that anymore because no one wants to talk to the IT department because it's full of people like Andrew and Django. But after that, I guess the first big implementation of the internet was e-commerce. So in 1994 we had the first iteration of sort of SSL, which is the security protocol for the internet. And then a year later, Amazon was launched, and the same year, eBay. And I think, apart from going to internet websites to look at maybe opening hours of something, you didn't really use the internet for much other than shopping back then. Shopping and brochureware. unless you were a company where you're using it for just data communication. I guess that was the main source of use. So retrospectively, it was named Web 1.0, and this was the first time where companies were expected to have that sort of front end, that shop front that was a website. We look at these sites now and we kind of forget really how hideous they were. And so this image here is Apple in 1997. And if you went to something like that, you might think you're in Thailand. So yeah, quite old. Anyway, so we also, at that time, we started using the internet for things like MSN Messenger, which was the early version of, I guess, like Line, WhatsApp, where you had to install something on your computer, and at 5 p.m. every day, as soon as you'd finish school, you'd go on it to talk to your friends. I got a few other screenshots. This was Google in '98, Yahoo, and Downing Street's website. So all. Do people actually remember the sort of internet looking like this?
Mm-hmm.
You do? Okay, I don't.
I've blocked it out.
Indeed. And then came along sort of the second iteration of the web. This was the social, so it's called the social web. So websites became interactive. They actually became more like a bit of software on your computer. They stopped being just click and go to a new site. It was more interactive. You had to log in, you had to register, you had to tag yourself in things, photos, posts, videos. You had friends on different networks. The sort of various different social media channels that were available back then. There were loads of others, and like I said, there was that boom of social media networks, and then we were left with two. You started to get rich content. You got animation, you got videos, sound. Google Apps came about. You had that sort of app-like experience, and you had user-generated content, which is still quite important today. This is where you had reviews. You had your own comments. And again, this was quite new. This was the start of forums, other forms of networks. It was I can't remember what it's called now.
Reddit.
Sort of, but there was a chat thing, like internet-based. I can't remember what it's called. There was an online chat group things that came about then as well. Message boards, yeah, that kind of thing.
Forums.
Yeah.
And we had the first online apps. So everyone uses, well, maybe not everyone, but Google Apps now is commonplace. We all use Google Docs for collaborative document sharing. We use Google Drive, and often we forget that we're using the internet. And it's the same bit of software that you would have used back to get the Apple site in '97. Okay, things have moved on a bit, but nothing really has changed that much. You forget that you're not loading up a soft bit of software on your computer. We ended up with things like P2P file sharing. People remember Napster or LimeWire. Torrents came about. And this is all using exactly the same technology that's powering the internet. We had Wikipedia. Advertising, which Paul knows about here, you adopted a cost per click model. It wasn't just buying a bit of ad space and paying per month. You were now, well, actually we're getting lots of use here. We need to pay only for the clicks we're getting. And SEO was, the term was invented in '99. So as the internet got faster and computers got more powerful, we had things like MySpace. You could register on there. You could talk to your friends. You could upload your music. You could stream music suddenly. Spotify came about a bit later, but you could go to a website and listen to music, radio. It wasn't just having to wait for it to download, which took weeks. And for those of you who know about it, the Agile Manifesto was invented, which is something that Django is very, very keen on. At the time, MySpace was bought for $580 million, and shortly after Facebook came about, and it was sold for $35 million. And so at this point, everything came very quickly. We had Facebook, Twitter, Flickr, and thousands of other companies I've probably forgotten to mention here. Remember when iPlayer came about, everyone was sort of amazed. You can watch TV on the internet. You don't have to buy a license. They probably should have done. Airbnb, a lot of these companies have really changed the way that we use not just the internet, but technology, our phones, the way we go on holiday, the way we travel. You think about TripAdvisor and you're using that to decide where to eat. Because before you would have maybe got a guidebook or something, or had to ask friends. You know, it's made our lives a lot easier. And Netflix, you know, I don't remember the last time I actually watched sort of terrestrial TV or had to sit down and this thing was on at 7 p.m. No one does that anymore. And not just that, you know, our day-to-day life was going online. We had internet banking, you know, you're ordering from Ocado or Sainsbury's, you're paying for your utility bills online, train tickets, plane tickets, theatre tickets, government services. You think about the British government now, and you can do a lot of it via the internet. You had Apple Pay, or you pay with your watch or your phone or something. We're now getting into the world of virtual banks, where you don't have a physical bank, they just have a license and it's an application. And kind of Andrew's area, you've got not just websites, but whole cities, everything's coming online. And you know, most of the time we're still using the same part of the internet that we used 30 years ago. With this, some companies got offline. You know, we lost Blockbuster shortly around the time that YouTube boomed, Kodak around the time of the iPhone, AOL lost out because they wanted to charge too much money, and people like Nokia. You know, we're forgetting that there were physical devices that lost out to the speed at which technology changes. And then I guess the area we're in now, we're in Web 3. This is the mobile revolution. I don't know if anyone ever had a smartphone that looked like one of them.
Yes.
Yeah.
They were awful.
We had the Motorola's before these, it's okay. The bricks.
I never owned one of these, but I remember I think my dad had one or something. And believe it or not, we actually had the first use of the mobile internet in '96, which is still quite hard to think about. Right? I remember using mobile internet in probably the early thousands, and it was awful. It was just so slow. And with that, we had the battle between Windows Mobile, Nokia, BlackBerry, and this was long before we had Android or iPhone. Actually, Nokia started off with the sort of smartphone market share of 52%, and then lost it all. We had the BlackBerry era where everyone had BlackBerries and BBM, BlackBerry Messenger. They're actually called the Crackberries in 2000s before WhatsApp was born out, and then the reason everyone had a BlackBerry was for email or Messenger, and it's gone with just one app release. And then Windows Mobile, which was useless really. And then we had the invention of the year in 2007. We had the iPhone. And everyone, all of the technology people were laughing. They were laughing at bring out a phone without a keyboard. And they kind of had the last laugh really. You know, whether you like it or you're an Android person, iPhone changed the way that we use the internet. It changed the way that we use applications. You know, you didn't need a computer anymore. You could use you just had everything here. And I think that was, you know, the biggest shift there is you didn't have to think of a computer as being the way that you communicated with the rest of the world. You just had a phone and that was it. And then Google released Android a year later. They actually changed quite a lot of things. Originally they were going to have a physical keyboard like the one here shown, and they released just the touchscreen. And this was kind of, I guess, the sort of start of the battle that we see now. We have the open technology, which is the Androids, the Wikipedias, that kind of thing. And then you've got the closed technology, like Andrew's. And with the open technology, it spawns the market share that Android has now of 80% or something, of maybe even higher, of phones in the world. And this is because it was open. It meant that Samsung could make their own version, HTC could have their own version. And you still have a bit of the battle, you know. Apple might be the most valuable tech company, apart from Amazon now, I think, but you know, its market share is tiny. It's 12% or something. And this graph shows it. You can sort of see, it may be hard to see, but the orange line going up here is Android's market share. So it's about 87% at the moment. And then iOS, which is this grey one here, at around 18%. it just kind of shows the gap in the market. The open technology is used by everybody. It does have its issues, but closed technology is there. And then another interesting graph is the percentage of traffic that's been used primarily by phones since 2009. So this year, it's 52.2% of all of the internet usage comes from a phone. And that's a lot. As when you're building websites for people now, you don't think about one of these. You think about the phone. You think that's it. This is how people are interacting with your brand, your site. And from a sort of digital transformation or evolution point of view, people have to get that now. These are the most important things for going forward for how people interact with not just your website or your brand, but your company. There's a really good article called "The Interface of a Cheeseburger," which talks about how simple it is to just go to McDonald's. And as an article, it talks about how your brand should be and just how simple it should be to use your company or your product. And I think that's a really good example to take forward. If you go to McDonald's, you you look at the menu, you get your cheeseburger and it comes out. There's nothing complicated. There's nothing confusing about it. And if your company could be as easy to use as McDonald's is, you'd all make a lot more money. And I think that's the point now, is that actually with the way that the internet's gone, when someone looks at your company on here or your product, they have to be just simple to use. So with this, we have the next sort of era of the internet, which is Andrew.
So, when most people think about Hitachi as a company, they think of a company that makes fridges and air conditioning units. As a conglomerate, we make everything from nuclear power stations through to mechanical, electrical, to a ton of different equipment. A long time ago, they figured out these equipment has to talk to each other. If we're going to get away from just looking at verticals, we have to look at horizontals. So we have to find a way to get this stuff to communicate. They also hired a bunch of people like myself who came from telcos. So we're used to making things communicate. We use a very strange language, but we're used to making things communicate. So they started saying, how can we do this initially in Japan? You were right, initially it was proprietary. The issue is that doesn't scale. So now if you zoom all the way forward from telcos in the old days, and I think the first thing I did when I came here was help build Telecom Asia, so it was a while ago. That was all proprietary. Nowadays it has to be open. More open systems, everything has to talk to everything else. When you start doing that, and you start looking from the infrastructure up, people's expectations of where they're living and what they do and what they can get out of it are changing. Their ability to manage facilities by having everything communicate with everything else is also changing. Because if you actually look at your data numbers, when you look at the ratios of mobile data versus data from notebooks, etc., Asia is very, very different from the rest of the Western world. This part, a lot of people don't have a computer at all, they just have this. And so the volume of data that's going through this, the amount of their lives and experience that go through this is huge. They expect to be able to use this to interact with everything, including where they work, what they do, and how the services are provided. I was promised not to use acronyms. I was told I get smacked if I do that, so I shall try and avoid them. What's realistically happening in this slide is as our urban environments are getting more and more interconnected through the different layers up here, I'm not going to go through it in detail, you will fall asleep, but fundamentally it's almost getting towards an organic level of complexity, where now a city or a smart mixed-use development, for the sake of argument, is actually as complicated as a body because of the level of connectivity. So you have to have a level of intelligence that sits across that to help you manage it, leverage it, and honestly to justify spending the amount of money people are spending on building these things. So what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about a specific example in Bangkok that we're working on, where they're a little bit ahead of everyone else. This is just, most people in the room I'm sure are aware of all of this. What's interesting in Bangkok right now is in the next 10 years, they're going to spend about $22 billion US on what they call mixed-use development. John, you know these numbers backwards, I trust. So basically what that means is that people are privately funding, not through the government, $22 billion of capex in Bangkok. to build these large mixed-use developments. The one Bangkok is one of the largest ones, as an example. That's about 3.5 billion. One of their issues is, how do I differentiate my development from someone else's? And this is where we come full circle back to this Internet of Things concept. They're saying, how can I use technology to make it work better? How can I use technology to generate services that will help me generate more revenue? How can I save money? How can I make it safer? All of these different things that are now have to be integrated into the construction process. You do this not as an IT project after you've built it, you design it into the bill as you go. It's a difficult area because most property developers are very cynical. Okay, so they say, show me the business case. So you have to be able to have a business case that justifies doing these things that both architects, engineers, QSs, who are an interesting breed, but these are the guys who tell you how much it's going to cost, and a few other people and the developers have to buy off on doing this by using the technology. The way you do that is you describe how people will interact with this, called day in the life of. So it's how you as a person doing your job will interact with these smart services and what differences they make to you. It's not a technology argument. This is the key issue. The technology is out there. The issue is, what can you do with that technology to make a business case that says it'll make this person's life either better, or it'll make more money, or it'll save you money, or it'll make you safer. This is happening in Bangkok right now. So what's happening is that people are now coming to Bangkok to look at projects like the one Bangkok and others to see what can be done. Which is surprising, because if I ask most people in the room who you would say are the top people in Southeast Asia, everyone says Singapore. Straight handed in, Singapore, it's got to be Singapore. Not for the commercial. On the government side, yes. Not on the commercial side. So we live in a city that currently is a little bit ahead on the private sector, not in the public sector. A little bit ahead on the private sector than the rest of this part of the world right now. So Singapore is actually coming over to have a look at what's happening. They're interested. So the question is, okay, this is happening, but how does this affect my company? What can we do? How can I look at this? If you think of it through the lens of the experience of people living and working in these communities, all of you impact these people. Different jobs, different areas. There will be many of these communities that will be built, and they're quite large. So it's different types of people living in these communities. They're also spreading out now into communities for senior care. So they're looking at where can I create an environment and enable that environment for people who are more senior to live and enjoy their lives, again, in Thailand. So it comes back to a technology's ability to leverage this. So what are the tools we're using? So we do use artificial intelligence, but not necessarily to do what you think we use it for, okay? So there's two levels. There's the fancy level where Google does funky stuff, right? Or IBM manages to not quite successfully crack cancer. Other AIs are being used where you say, reach this outcome and iterate many, many, many times to get there and figure it out. That's a different type of AI. So those are being said, please figure out how to make my building run more efficiently. Figure out how, through video analytics, I can make people safer. Technology exists nowadays that can actually, on a national basis, figure out roughly how happy people are. Now, it sounds obvious. If you're English, we don't smile in public very often. If you're Thai, you spend the whole time smiling, even when you want to kill someone. So it has to be different types of analytics for different types of nations. So all these different things, because of the level of connectivity that exists now, which is both international and domestic, are becoming possible. These things are slowly but surely going to go away, okay? Because the level of connectivity and the battery life, stuff shoved in here, or in your pocket, or in your glasses, is going to come through to the point where once and if the battery or the power source issue gets solved, that can be done in the cloud. Then it's just a device that you look through and talk to. But again, it's people's experiences and what they can do with the technology that's important and vital.
I guess that's the most important thing for the internet in the future. It's not just going up and loading a website. It's how you interact with buses, with your building, with your company,
medical care,
everything. I think this is important for everyone to understand, is that the internet isn't just going to a website anymore. gone far beyond that into the internet being your apartment, your phone, your glasses, your doctors, everything.
I think one of the reasons that I wanted to talk a little bit today was that most people are still very focused on IoT being I can turn my lights on and off with my voice. Great. Where's the business plan? Okay. Until you get situations where you have a business plan for deploying this stuff and developing it, it's very hard to push it. It's very hard for it to grow. That business case is now being perceived in several very large areas. Governments invest in it, but the problem is, and I don't just mean the Thai government, other governments invest in it very heavily, but governments are by their nature slow. And so as a result, it's hard to get that much change to happen quickly. What we're seeing in Thailand is islands of development being paid for by individuals, conglomerates, and banks that are pushing some of the new developments to be made and to be done. And they're going back to the government and saying, I don't need your help for my stuff, but how is my development going to communicate with my other development? And how are our two developments going to communicate with theirs? Because the people using them want it to be transparent, because they expect it to be transparent through those. So the government now is struggling, as I think most of you know, on how to achieve that. One of the ideas is to get a conglomerate put together between people like some of the domestic very large IT companies, Microsoft, other companies, ours is one of them, to see if we can help set up almost like a mesh that would link these developments together through a protocol. Okay, so that they can communicate with each other, so it's transparent to the user to some degree. From an advertising point of view, that would be nirvana if it happens. Please don't hold your breath. But they are thinking about those things. Thai law is a little complex in some of these areas. That's why it's difficult for them to provide the service themselves. You're all really quiet,
We're listening.
which is quite worrying.
We have loads of questions.
Well, shoot, ask some questions. It's not supposed to be just us talking. You want to say something first, then some questions?
No, I'm good.
Questions,
I'm
please,
feeling
sure.
questions.
We're talking about the internet, right?
Yeah.
The internet has fantastic advantages, how it's changed our life,
Right.
right? But we also have something underneath there called the darknet. I don't want to get into that.
understand.
I just mentioned the word.
Sure.
But now we have blockchain technology.
Yep.
That to me is a use of the internet, how we're going to use the network of the world in future. And I see that as the next major change that we're going to see, let's say, in the next 5 to 8 years. Your feelings on that?
On transactional
Or
process.
on blockchain
Yeah, sure.
transactions,
So-
yes.
On. Do you mind if I answer that one? Do you want to go?
Go for it.
So, we're actually doing research right now into what can be done with blockchain. So effectively, the distributed ledger system allows you to basically make it very hard to fraudulently transact. Unfortunately, it also makes it very hard to track people doing it. So it's a bit complex. It's both sides of it. We're seeing insurance companies right now are using blockchain to track the whole process of approving and running through the contracts. Contracts in some of the construction contracts, they're now looking at using blockchain in order to allow for a standardized contractual process, because it's very hard to mess with it. So I think it's great. I don't think it's a panacea, but I do think it's changing the way people think about transactions.
But I think with blockchain, I'm going to go back here to a few slides. Where is it? Google Documents. So everyone's talking about blockchain being this fantastic thing, and it has its uses. But the biggest advantage of blockchain is that you can keep a record of every change made to a thing, and you can share that log of changes with somebody, and everyone else can make changes to it, and all those changes are made in order. But Google Docs has been doing that since '99 or something. You know, it's got a revision history where you can make changes. And I think everyone's kind of caught up on blockchain being the future of stuff, but I'm not personally convinced on it.
Well, if I could just have a supplementary on that. The problem with the internet is that not many of us trust it. It's insecure, it's full of hackers, etc. And it's full of advertisements, and then they use my personal data without asking me. Now, blockchain overcomes all that, except there'll be a fee for using it. The fee for using the internet is your monthly broadband fee. That's the cost of a network throughout the world. Blockchain will require another fee to use it. But for me, I'd go for it tomorrow. Totally and utterly secure. I think everybody would agree with that.
But the fee would be your computer doing a bunch of computations for the blockchain. So you're still paying for it with your own
Yeah, that's
resources.
right. It comes at a cost, but it's secure. If I say to you, here's $1,000 on the blockchain net, that's secure. It's not on the internet.
But I think transactionally you're correct. It provides a level of anonymity, can't even say the word. It provides a level of anonymity, and it also provides a level of security in the transaction. The challenge that we're facing at the moment is the balance. That very anonymity is causing an issue because the wrong people are using it for the wrong stuff.
Right.
But transactionally, what they're trying to do is link it to contracts particularly, because there's a very consecutive process in a contract process. So they like using blockchain for that. So I think, yes, you're right, it will change the way we transact. The problem is a lot of very smart people who aren't terribly nice people have also figured out they can do a lot of things with it. So policing a blockchain network is complicated because of the anonymity, but once you get into that particular distributed ledger, as they've done now with many of the police forces for some of these areas, they can then trace it back. So I think you're right, I think it will change things. Anything else from anyone else? God, we bored them to death.
Okay, so I guess we've spoken a little bit about the history, we've set the scene, we've spoken about Web3, which is where we are now, the mobile revolution, and Andrew's spoken a little bit about how this is now affecting our day-to-day life in terms of cities, the way we go to work. I spoke about the interface for Cheeseburger, and how the internet affects how we just interact with the brand. So what is the future going to bring? Is it all sci-fi as we see, or is it nearer than we think? So I did a couple of search trend history lookups on Google. So this is basically where Google shows you how popular a particular search term is. So let's see. So just looking now at machine learning and artificial intelligence. So this is from 2004 to today. So you can sort of start to see the trends now of what people are searching for. And I guess once people start searching for it at a certain frequency, you can sort of say it's maybe it's not sci-fi anymore. Maybe it is actually it's being used. So we've got smart cities. So Andrew's side of things. You look at the massive boom in this. So it peaked at around August 15, and then it's kind of just been steady since then. So that's not new. That's very much a today thing. Digital transformation. So this is taking your offline companies, the older things, and making them new. This is, I think we've had talks on this before. This is probably one of the most important terms now for a business is how do you prepare, not just for now but the future, and that means getting ready for things like blockchain, getting ready for AI. And you can see as the trend now is increasing to today. A lot of others, big data and Internet of Things, very much the same kind of trend. So the words we're hearing now, big data, again, it's plateaued a bit since 2015. That's a now thing, that's not a future thing. And then finally the Internet of Things. You can see this, again, that's very much a growing thing. So whereas smart cities have been around a while, we've had the concept of that, the Internet of Things is growing. Again, so you can go to trends.google.com and type in anything, and it will show you how that's working. So you can look at maybe something that's related to your own business, and sort of see how that's working, see what software is out there for that. So going back to the panel discussion, and again, please feel free to dive in with any questions. I'm going to turn to Django as the transformation specialist. Where do you see the future of the internet beyond I guess smart cities and the way that we interact with it now?
I think the thing that's sort of interesting me really at the moment, quite recently, it's an itch I'm I'm starting to get to think about is it's nothing new, it's nothing we don't already know, is geographical distribution, and I'm really thinking about. I was thinking about how if you were setting up a company today, you might consider setting that up as a distributed company, particularly if you're going to be able to balance your workforce in terms of location, specialisation, and price. And it's a kind of ideal thing, but I think the reason you might think about that if you were going to start a business today rather than 10 years ago, it's just that the technology is there now, and that's although it's strange, these things are so everyday for us, and this is partly what this sort of evolution talk is about, is what a short time frame that those changes have taken place in. And so I'm kind of got very curious about this geographically distributed future, particularly because a company starting today certainly can do it, and certainly many will consider, and some will. Whereas an existing large company, they're going to have a huge amount of inertia. They're going to have it in their offices, their structure, and so on. And so that's a kind of fascination, because I think that could drag the existing companies into that world. And as a consultant, that I sort of ripe with opportunities, of course.
You had a question?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Good point.
I'm off on.
That was good. My question is about, so where is that tipping point? I heard you said that if a company was setting up today,
Yeah.
they build all this into their business model, they
Yeah.
be cheaper, quicker to the market, etc. So for all those companies that have got legacy systems, where is the tipping point? Is it when a disruptor like an Airbnb or a Uber or a Grab comes out and they're forced to do something? Or how do you see companies getting ahead of the curve and saying, okay, we need to revise our pricing, even though we've got legacy systems, we need to go to market faster, cheaper, quicker?
It's classical, because if you've got an existing market, you don't want to cannibalise it with a cheaper service, and that's where you end up with your Kodaks, right, and your Blockbusters or whatever it is. Those
there are a lot of
worse.
I mean, if we take your premise, and I do, everything is a Kodak or a Blockbuster.
Potentially, yeah. So that could be like, it's when you think about it, it's kind of obvious, but I haven't really heard people talking about it. Maybe I haven't. I just haven't been aware of it. But once you see that, it's like, hold on, that could really be, if you're talking disruptive, I like to use a sort of trendy word so much, but it's like a potential train driving through a lot. So it's kind of interesting to think about, and it's funny you mentioned Airbnb, because I was sort of thinking about that. So if people can sort of live everywhere and you don't, and so you've got a company, it's an American company, they're going base somewhere in the Midwest, I don't know, where they have, but they have the community and the people that are living there. So why do you live in an area? Because maybe your partner they have their job and you have your job and your kids are at school. Those are the things that tie you to a location. And I started thinking, well, hold on, that's kind of interesting, because some of those things are also being very early, they've got potential to be loosened by the technology we even have today. So remote working, very obvious. Remote schooling is kind of, that's a new edtech space. That's something which hasn't even really kicked in, but is at the very early days. And then I was thinking about, well, you've got your house, you've got your mortgage, and all your knickknacks and stuff. But of course, then I was thinking about Airbnb. We use Airbnb for holidays. But could you, is there? I was thinking about, WeWork. They're sort of operating a model for office space now, where it's it's not virtual, but it's you don't have long leases. You can maybe even work over a network of offices. So you're not tied to one spot, you're not tied into a 6-month lease with your office, you don't have to calculate what your head count's going to be, install computers and the whole shebang. So, is there potentially a residential model, something that starts to become like that? Does Airbnb sort of enter a residential market where it becomes much more fluid in terms of where you live, and you could up sticks in 6 months and go to some other country?
Going to go back to your original question of sort of where's the tipping point, I think if you look at the Kodak case study, the competitors to Kodak at the time, so I think Fuji, they were investing in parallel businesses. So they had their print business that was very popular and film and everything. But actually they invested on the side and had other companies that they were either buying or setting up as startups, sort of along the parallel. And so I think maybe, I don't know what the tipping point is for a company, at what point you swap over, but I think it's important to have those parallel businesses or service lines where you run them as a sort of digital first startup or brand. And the tipping point is when that starts to make money and this one starts to decline, is you don't then start, you swap. You swap focus. And I think, maybe starting from scratch is something we should all be doing on sort of those parallel sides now, ready for 3-4 years, so we don't become a Nokia or an AOL or something.
I think what we're seeing also is that previously for people to look at digital transformation was a bit scary. It means, okay, I'm going to get an ERP system or something else, right? Now it's a totally radical change. And so the issue is most executives don't like radical change. I mean, obviously, right? It's uncomfortable, it's difficult, no one likes it. But we're living in a world now where once you get to a certain scale, you can't run away from it. It's going to happen, it's going to catch you, and it can happen in some of the most traditional businesses in the world, whether it be construction or something else, and it can happen in the software business. So the issue when we're talking to executives as consultants, which we are, right, is, what are you doing to think about doing something different? And the guy looks at you and says, what? You say, okay, your industry typically, these are the trends we're seeing. The issue now is they're actually listening. Whereas previously they're like, yeah, it's another management consulting pitch, what do you want to tell me now? Now it's like, seriously, they're worried about it. They're saying, what can we be doing proactively? What should we be looking at? I'm not saying the consulting industry has all the answers at all. They have a framework to get there for sure, but they don't have the answers. The issue is we're seeing executives at all levels, big companies and small, looking at how can we do this? Talking to technology gurus and saying, look, rather than just tell me a new system, what do you think I should be looking at? Blockchain people saying, can I do something with it? Is there a business case?
It can also be an internal change. Yeah. So the other day I was having a meeting with someone who wasn't necessarily looking at a technology shift sort of in this digital transformation or the tipping point. It was, can you come in and do a presentation to our staff to encourage them to think about the tipping point? So at what point does their manual job get replaced by technology?